What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 158. I'm the co-host Kyle Anzalone, joined by the co-host Will Porter. Will, how you doing today?
I'm doing great tonight, Kyle. How you doing, man?
Doing well, and we have a bunch of stuff to talk about here, Will, but of course more news on Afghanistan, where we're continuing to get updates of not only what's going on there now, which is important, but what's happened over the past month, and really since Biden's taken office, and how things in Afghanistan have gone the way they've gone. So we'll be talking about a lot of that stuff, and then some Ukraine police shootings, all that and more on today's show. Be sure to share the show. You find it at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org /Kyle for a full archive of the show. Will Porter is modeling some of the great merchandise that they have for sale at the Libertarian Institute. So if you want some swag, you could there's a store for that there, and you can see Will in those great Libertarian Institute sweat. I think he's got the sweatshirt on tonight. If you're watching the show, so subscribe to that at YouTube, Odyssey, or Rumble. Audio version of the podcast is up everywhere, and you can follow the show on any of our social media accounts at Facebook, MeWe, or Twitter. We take donations, Patreon, and Subscribestar. Also, there's crypto information in the show notes page. Well, the last way people could support the show, and I think this is one of the best ones they should do, because not only do you support a great company owned by libertarians, but you also get yourself some high quality CBD products, which I think almost everyone could use, especially now where there's so much pressure for, so many people, especially my libertarian friends, when I talk to them, they're worried about losing their jobs because of these vaccine mandates and everything like that. And it is a stressful time, and, there's reasons for stress and everything like that. But at the same time, you got to go to sleep at night. You got to enjoy life a little bit. So check out their great selection of products over at Paloma Verde. Will, what do you like there?
Yeah, they got quite a few great products. They got these high-dose oil tinctures. That's for if you just want the highest dose of CBD you can possibly get. That's what I like to take. But my real favorite is the melatonin soft gels. They have a couple different formulations. They have curcumin in one of them, but I like the melatonin ones to help me relax, wind down at night. I have insomnia issues. So if that stuff sounds interesting to you, or if you want to check out their, they have lab results, they have educational resources about what CBD is and does, check out palomaverdecbd.com and use the promo code PEACE to get 25% off your order.
All right, Will, and certainly you might need some Paloma Verde to get to sleep tonight after talking about what we have to talk about first here, and that is, of course, the results of the U.S. drone strike in Kabul, and I think you're learning some more information about that, Will, so what's happening?
Yeah, that's correct. I believe we mentioned this strike in Kabul last week that did end up killing civilians. I believe the last tally I'd seen was 10 people. All members of the same family, the Ahmadi family. And I'd seen some conflicting stuff. I think it was 6 or 7 of them were children. I believe 7, including a 3-year-old little girl. So, a pretty grisly, horrible death toll, and a lot of kids to be killed in this strike. This was the second U.S. strike on alleged ISIS targets in Afghanistan over the last few weeks. The first one was in Jalalabad, and as far as we know so far, did not kill any civilians. Though we may learn otherwise at some point once there's some more reporting on that.
Or we may not ever learn, Will, as often happens in countries like Somalia, which I think one thing to know is the reporting out of Afghanistan, especially places like the Nangarhar province where there's an ISIS-K element. Maybe the reporting out of there doesn't get so good, and we're going to start to have a lot of people being killed by the U.S. if Biden continues these overrising capabilities. And just something I want to point out is I think the reporting then what we get about these stories is going to decrease, especially when they're not happening in Kabul.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, in these remote areas, like, the CENTCOM, they'll say, 0 civilian casualties, but we really have no way of confirming or knowing that. And if there aren't many journalists on the ground there, especially ones that can speak and write in English, then yeah, we may just never learn that information. But this second strike, though, in Kabul, the Pentagon claims that they struck a car carrying Islamic State fighters and explosives. And they claim they actually saw people loading bombs into this vehicle, I guess presumably through like drone footage or something. And while the government has at least acknowledged reports of civilian casualties, I don't think that they've actually acknowledged any themselves yet. But even then, they have tried to suggest that it was not their drone strike that may have killed these civilians that, they haven't even confirmed, if were killed or not. But if there were civilians killed, they say it was secondary explosions from a bomb inside the car that may have done it. And so that is their story. That's the official sort of Pentagon account right now. However, relatives of these victims are now disputing that version of events. I think it was two brothers of the Ahmadi family, Ramal and Amal. They spoke to the Associated Press, and they say they do not believe there were explosives inside this car. And they say the U.S. has offered no evidence to suggest that there were. And one of the brothers was quoted as saying, quote, they have to give us answers. Is our blood so worthless that we don't even get an explanation? Basically just saying no one's telling them anything. They've been kept in the dark about this. This brother also says there were children inside the car that was hit, not only just in the vicinity of the area nearby. And he's disputing that there was a bomb in this vehicle. He's saying that if there were one, that there should have been much more damage to the surrounding area in this courtyard where it was hit. Apparently, there were a couple gas cylinders in the location of the strike that were totally undamaged. And so he's saying that if there really were a bomb in this car, those should have been totally destroyed, as well as much of the area. And I did see some photos of the area, and there are some vehicles that look like they were pretty destroyed. But it's not really clear to me which one was supposed to be the car bomb, and you'd think it would be a little more obvious if it supposedly had been carrying this huge amount of explosives inside. The photos I saw, though, maybe didn't give the best look of the area. Reuters had a series of them on their gallery. However, the other brother, Amal, is also insisting that none of the people of none of his family members, none of the people who were killed in this strike had any ties to the Islamic State or terrorist groups. He even said that two of the relatives who were killed in the strike, they actually had worked with U.S. forces in some capacity during the occupation, I think as contractors of some sort or interpreters. And they were even applying.
And just to clarify on that, because the U.S., as you said, is still claiming that they were Islamic State, and they just haven't responded to the specific claim from the alleged relatives of the victims that the people killed work for the United States. They're kind of ignoring that and just sticking with this was a terrorist.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, but these relatives claim that they had. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt you?
No. Go ahead, Will.
Okay. But yeah. So yeah. Anyway, these relatives are saying that they had even applied, these two guys who had worked for U.S. forces. They'd even applied for special immigration visas, and they even had commendation letters saying that vouching for them and saying they had been good allies or whatever. And so that would definitely cut against the idea that they were Islamic State fighters. And this brother Amal, he also says there weren't only kids in the car that was hit, but that there were clearly kids out in the open where the strike took place. And so one of his quotes was, quote, they have such high technology that they can see an ant on the ground, but they couldn't see a yard full of children. And I thought that was a pretty good point, because the Pentagon is claiming that they had such good granular intelligence that they saw guys loading a bomb into this car in real time. They claim to have that good intelligence, but yet they couldn't tell that they were about to bomb a courtyard full of kids. So, I think that was a good point to raise as well. Now, one argument that I've been hearing from hawks about this strike and about these civilian casualties is that it just goes to show about why we shouldn't have pulled our troops out. That had we had a more of an on the ground presence, that maybe we would have had better intelligence, and maybe we would have avoided killing these innocent people. But that is just absolute nonsense. We have been killing civilians with drone strikes all along in Afghanistan, including when Obama had 100,000 troops in the country. A real on the ground presence. That the hawks seem to want right now. And it actually, thanks to the heroic leaks of Daniel Hale, we know that at one point between 2012 and 2013, 90% of the people killed in U.S. drone strikes were civilians. And so this idea that we can blame these civilian deaths in this Kabul strike on the withdrawal and the lack of an on-the-ground presence, that is just complete BS. That argument does not hold water at all.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say here is even though the Pentagon hasn't come out and officially confirmed that it killed civilians in this strike, they have tried to roll out this sort of argument that these civilian casualties may have been killed by so-called secondary explosions, from the bombs inside the car. However, that is not the first time that they've tried to use this excuse. And in fact, our more loyal and diehard listeners may remember the very first time I was ever interviewed by you back in 2017 on your old show, Foreign Policy Focus. We discussed a story about a U.S. airstrike in Mosul, Iraq, on a house that killed more than 100 people, And it was a massive bloodbath. Some reports put it over 200 dead. But after that strike, the Pentagon tried to argue that it was secondary explosions that killed all these people, not the 500-pound bomb they dropped on the house that completely reduced it to rubble. And so they're trotting out this sort of same excuse again for the Kabul strike. Our bombs are good bombs. When we drop bombs and they explode, they do good things. But these were bad bombs that killed these people. So that's sort of the Pentagon's sort of up to its same old dirty tricks here and using the same kind of excuse to justify or explain away these civilians killed in Kabul.
Yeah. Well, that fantastic, and thank you so much for all that great reporting on what's happening here. Now, I guess, do you have it? I guess it was the Pentagon that carried out this strike, but we don't really have clarity on how Biden has revised the guidelines for these drone strikes. Where, at one point during the Obama administration, if there were a possibility of civilians getting killed, it was more strict and they couldn't do this. And then with the Islamic State, and then especially I think during the Trump administration, they really loosened up the rules even more. And so, is there any indication of who approved this strike? How high up the chain of command it went?
I'm not sure. I'm like, as far as I know, the Pentagon has been very scant about the details they've been willing to put out about this. I know that the Pentagon spokesman, John Kirby, was repeatedly asked details just about, because, they've been calling it an over-the-horizon strike. And I don't believe they've even given any details about that, about where this may have been launched from or the, sort of the approval process or anything. And it's unfortunate because I've been checking the Pentagon press briefings, and it seems reporters are less and less interested about this strike. More and more, you're just hearing questions about the evacuation process, which sure is important and interesting. But it's unfortunate that it seems interest is being lost in this drone strike.
Right. Well, I don't know if you had any other big news stories on other than what's happening in Panjshir, but there's a couple stories I want to mention. The first, since we're just talking about the exit, there's this report from the Hill that I'm somewhat suspicious about, but I want to mention it. They claim that Americans and Afghan commandos were evacuated through a secret CIA base outside of Kabul. They say they got, I believe, 1,000 people out through that base, and again, these included the Afghan commandos, which I think are their, special forces, and probably also some of the people that have worked through the CIA and potentially in the CIA death squads. And so, Will, as much as I'm not opposed to this idea that people who assisted the U.S. war effort in Afghanistan with their lives being threatened or something like that, should have a home in the United States. We talk about that argument, but at some point this does turn into Operation Paperclip, where you're bringing tortures and stuff into the United States, and there has to be real questions when you're talking about who the CIA is alleging to bring to the country, especially when we know that there's been war crimes committed by the CIA allies on the ground. And so, I know it's very unpopular to say anything bad possible about refugees, but understand that the people that I'm imagining are getting priority here are not the just regular people of Afghanistan, but rather the corrupt officials who worked most closely with Americans, the soldiers who worked closely with Americans, potentially those who commit war crimes, and then particularly the Afghan special forces, and again with links to the CIA committing some pretty terrible atrocities. Not just they cut a finger off a dead soldier, but executing children, things like that, are some pretty credible war crimes accused to the CIA allies in Afghanistan. Now, the second point I want to make here, Will, is that I also think it's possible that maybe nobody really got out through here, and this is just CIA propaganda. See, isn't it good that the CIA had a presence on the ground in Afghanistan? And so I don't want to just buy right into it and say, yeah, they got 1,000 people out through there, because we should always be suspect when the CIA is reporting something through the mainstream media. But it just is interesting, to talk about what Afghans are being brought over, and specifically, if any, who worked with the CIA are. And that is something I think, people should rightfully have a pretty big issue with. Another issue, go ahead, Will.
I was just gonna say that, yeah, I mean, like, I think it is sort of unpopular right now to point that kind of thing out because, like, the story right now is so much, oh, the poor Afghans, and now they're all under the yoke of the Taliban. But, like, the level of torture that went on and the level of corruption that went on under the regime that we backed, like, it's kind of not popular to talk about that right now. But yeah, like, it is kind of interesting who we might be importing into our country here as refugees. People who were involved in this, like, corrupt torture regime.
Right. I mean, a huge portion of the Afghan economy, because I'm not saying that this isn't because of the American war in that country, is though the opium growth and heroin trade. So, how many of these
Right,
people
yeah.
are that, Afghans that spent their life, their skill is growing poppy. Or refining the opium into like heroin or something like that. This is just an interesting country that's been largely because of the U.S. in a very impoverished state for a long time, and I'm sure that a lot of the people that are coming are going to have especially like children and stuff, maybe significant PTSD issues from all the U.S. drones and air warfare. One thing I want to point out just in relation to this is the government, everybody likes to say that, this is one of the things they're good at. I strongly disagree. They are not good at housing people and moving people around. In fact, the Biden administration has apparently lost track of 1 in 3 of the migrant children that came to the border, and then they released them to, somebody claiming to be a relative. And this is pretty concerning because this is a group of children that's in a very, very, very high risk category for sexual exploitation. They live in a country where they don't have a legal status. They live in a country where they may not speak the language or, speak a limited amount of English, can communicate with a small number of people. Who knows if the relatives that are in the U.S. they've ever met before, if they're good people. There's just so many, a long list of potential problems. Also, who knows how many of these people they were told to get the name of the smuggler once they got to the USA. This person's gonna help set you up, put you in an apartment, all that kind of stuff. You go there, you have no rights. They basically, turn you into a prostitute. These are things that people know happen, right? This is a major problem, and so I think this is only going to be exacerbated with the number of Afghans that they've brought into the country in such a short amount of time, and just really having no idea how to house them. Who knows if they're going to have enough food? I saw some pictures of people at Fort Bliss where, it's been a nightmare for the migrants down there. I think they actually had ServPro administering some of that facility, and they're the disaster cleanup guys. And when they say disaster cleanup, they mean like your house burns down, not, you have an extra relative you got to find a bed for, right? And I saw some people posting pictures, and it's like, 3 tiny pieces of chicken, I would guess like 4 to 6 ounces of chicken, and then carrots, like a small number of carrots. Maybe this is like bare minimum going to get people to like enough calories a day that it somehow meets a technical requirement. But that probably shows that the rest of their care isn't very good either. And so that was one concern I had. The last story, I had to mention was just these biometric machines. And there's a report on this published at Consortium News by Margaret Hu. And she just kind of goes through and says that in 2011, we knew that 4.8 million Afghans had their biometric data taken. And I think that includes a lot, like fingerprints, iris scans, where you work, who you are, all that information. And they collected it through 2 systems. The BAT system, which is a laptop with like a scanner attached to it, and then HIDE, which is the handheld version of that. And at the very least, the Taliban are known to have captured the HIDE systems. Now, there is some question if they are able to access that technology, and there is multiple ways they could get to it. One that people aren't talking about is that somebody who worked for the U.S., an Afghan who worked for the U.S., defects to the Taliban and brings that information with them. I kind of think that's probably the most likely, as fast as we saw the Afghan army fall, is that there's enough of those elements within the Taliban that they would maybe have this ability. But also, the Pakistani ISI, of course, now China, Iran, Russia all have interest in Afghanistan, and or even like Turkey and Qatar, who maybe are kind of American allies in a way, but I would think if they're looking for to get interest in Afghanistan, that this may be something they would help. So there's plenty of sources. I'm just trying to say for the Taliban to get this information. And again, we have no idea how many Afghans. There's 32 million Afghans. I believe they wanted 80%. I have no idea if they got there. They at least have 4 million records of Afghans, though. This is the number we know, and they've scanned people since. Now, I will say part of this, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the coming days we find out that one of the reasons, at least they claim that they were able to evacuate so many people from Afghanistan, was because they had biometrics on everyone, and that this allowed them to quickly scan and identify people at the airport. Hell, that may be true. At the same time, if the Taliban get their hands on this list, it is going to provide them information, a lot of more information that I think Americans would be comfortable with our government knowing. And so that's the position we've now put millions, who knows how many Afghans in. Not saying that the Taliban are going to use this for reprisals, but just saying that I would feel very threatened if, my government had all that information on me. And so I'm sure that, the people of Afghanistan feel even more uncomfortable hearing these reports. Right. And as right now we have people like, Matt's Boot saying that, hey, we need to get everybody vaccine cards and like digital passports and everything like that. One of the real downsides to that is who knows who's going to end up with that, that personal medical information that's all going to be served in one U.S. government database in, a certain amount of time. And I believe there was a problem in Iraq where after the Shia government got this, they essentially used it as a hit list against Sunnis. And so...
Right.
Yep. Will, anything on that?
That's always sort of the issue with like mass surveillance and mass data collection. Like it might be one thing for the NSA to have all this data. Maybe they're not going to use it against you, but their security of that data might be poor, and it might end up in somebody else's hands. So that's always an issue too, that like the person collecting the data might not be the one who uses it against you. And so that's exactly the issue here with this biometric stuff in Afghanistan.
Right. I mean, how many leaks had like Vault 7 leaked from the CIA? The Chelsea Manning's leaks were leaks from the Pentagon. The State Department, got hacked by the Chinese government, and all those questionnaires that all the U.S. employees filled out got stolen. So this is a real issue. But, before we wrap up our discussion on Afghanistan, what is happening in the Panjshir Valley? In one sense, I'm hearing that the resistance to the Taliban are making major gains. But in another, I saw this report from Reuters this morning where Massoud, who is declared at least the head of the resistance, said that they're ready for talks with the Taliban, which sound to me like they might be losing. So what's your interpretation of what's happening here?
Yeah, I think you really kind of framed it well, too, because there is sort of, I am hearing sort of this double-sided thing. And this often does happen from the battlefield where both sides kind of want to tout their successes and victories, and it's not quite clear who's actually telling the truth. Now, we did touch on this story kind of in its very early stages when it was first developing, but quite a lot has happened since with this whole, anti-Taliban resistance in Panjshir. So pretty soon after the fall of Kabul, the former vice president under the U.S.-backed government, Amrullah Saleh, he kind of declared himself as basically the technical leader of Afghanistan, because Ghani had fled, and he was still there. And at the time, he mentioned that he was heading to Panjshir province to help lead a resistance movement against the Taliban. And I think even at the time, we may have showed images of him along with this major Tajik warlord, Ahmad Massoud, who you mentioned. I think we showed a picture of them going there to Panjshir. And Ahmad Massoud is the son of this other big warlord, Ahmad Shah Massoud, who had fought the Taliban through the 1990s, but who was assassinated in 2001. However, his son Ahmad has kind of taken over for him, and he is now sort of the major resistance leader in this movement in Panjshir. And this is made up of a lot of former troops from the Afghan military and other remnants of the former government, like the former VP Saleh, who's kind of one of the leaders there. And Massoud's son, Ahmad Massoud, actually recently published an op-ed in the Washington Post trying to like rally people to lobby their governments to support the Panjshir fighters. And the thing about Panjshir, the province is historically a stronghold for what's called the Northern Alliance. And that was a group of warlords from northern Afghanistan who kind of came together to fight the Taliban in the 90s. And when the Taliban actually ruled Afghanistan in the 90s as the actual government, when they were the previous Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, Panjshir was actually like the only region they couldn't totally capture and pacify. So it does have significance as this kind of bastion of anti-Taliban resistance. And currently, at least as far as I know, that the Taliban does not actually fully control that province. And now I wasn't totally sure when they were first announcing this, when the old VP was saying that we're going to lead this resistance movement, and Massoud was saying that. I wasn't sure if this was going to be just a PR stunt and just like a very short-lived thing, but it does seem serious. Like there's photos now of columns of troops carrying the old Northern Alliance flag. They're calling themselves the National Resistance Front, the NRF, and so they've sort of given themselves an official name. And some fighting has already broken out. On Saturday, the Taliban apparently tried to move into the province. You kind of referred to this, but there have been some conflicting reports. The Taliban claimed that they did capture like a strategic entrance into the Panjshir Valley, and that they've had some successes. However, the Panjshir guys claim that they repelled them and that they killed a bunch of Taliban fighters and held them off. And so it's hard to trust a lot of these battlefield reports. It's not really clear like who is telling the truth here. I know that one Taliban rep did speak to Al Jazeera and said that their advance had been kind of slowed down because a lot of the roads in Panjshir have been landmined. A lot of the roads into the capital of Bazarak have landmines on them. And so, again, it's not totally clear what the situation is there currently. I'm not sure like who controls what exactly, how far the Taliban has moved in there. But we do know for a fact that there is some fighting going on in Panjshir. Now, one of the last things I had seen, because there had previously been some attempts to negotiate before this fighting started. The Taliban had reportedly offered to let the local militias appoint whatever governors they had wanted, but I guess those talks had broken down and they started fighting. But apparently, like you said, Massoud is now talking about being willing to negotiate again with the Taliban. And so that is some of the last stuff I had seen. And I guess that might suggest that maybe the fighting isn't going too well for the Panjshiri fighters, that he's willing to talk. Because my impression is sort of this was a long shot that these Panjshir guys are going to take back Afghanistan from the Taliban. However, it is worth noting that in the 90s, the Taliban could not pacify this province. So, maybe these guys really can put up a fight. But I guess we'll see, and we'll see if these talks really do go through. That is some of the latest news.
Yeah, well, thanks for that update. I really don't have anything to add on this. Anything else on Afghanistan before we move on?
No, that's pretty much all I had. There is an official account or a semi-official account for the Panjshiri resistance that if people go to my Twitter, they can find, and you can follow that for some updates from that side of the conflict. But I believe the next story we wanted to hit on is something to do with Elijah McClain, an update on that police brutality story. So please tell us about that.
Yeah, well, so I guess we're at just over 2 years since Elijah McClain was killed by, I think it was the Aurora Police, which is a town outside of Denver, actually not too far from where I live. And it was really after the George Floyd thing sparked, I think, in particularly the Denver but Aurora area, one of the causes that they picked up was Elijah as a part of their Black Lives Matter rally. For them, they were like trying to get justice for him, rather than being as concerned about George Floyd or something like that. It was a whole movement, but that was their like particular demand in their area. Now, in November of 2019, so this was 2 or 3 months, Elijah was killed on August 30th, 2019. The Adams County, I believe it is like, the county that the murder happened in. They declined to prosecute the officers or the paramedics involved. And then now, I think it was actually on the anniversary of his death or right around it last week, we got the announcement from the state prosecutor that they were going to go ahead and move forward with charges against 3 police officers and 2 paramedics. Now, at least as far as the research I've been able to do, Will, it's not entirely clear to me how maybe involved all 5 of these people were, but at least, the paramedics were involved in administering the ketamine, and the police were involved in giving that order, and were involved in, I think, restraining and confronting Elijah. And so, I guess briefly going back to what happened to him on August 30th, he was walking home. I think maybe you could say he was like acting peculiar. I think he was like kind of singing and dancing around. He was confronted by police, and rather than just listening to everything the police were demanding that he do, especially seeing that he wasn't doing anything wrong, somehow it escalated, and his strange behavior then became something the cops identified to instruct the paramedics to give him ketamine. Will, I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about the use of police officers, by police officers and paramedics, of ketamine, and the possible repercussions of doing that. And the big issue in McLean's case was that they, depending on how you look at it, they either misguessed his weight or just were completely negligent and shot him up with too much. The medical, I guess the autopsy of the state coroner found that they gave him 500 milligrams when they should have given him 325. And so they gave it to him for somebody not quite twice his body weight, but pretty darn close to it. Like, they gave him a dose for a 200-pound man, and I think he was 143. So, it was quite the over guess and weight. And also, that would seem to be one of the things that, if I wanted a drug that I could like deploy in these kind of situations to make somebody calm, I think one of the requirements that I would have was that there really wasn't an overdose risk, and it was easy to dose. You give every adult essentially the same thing. Right. Because I'm guessing a lot of times people with like mental illness, like, they overdress and wear too many coats and stuff like that, and so they look a lot bigger than they actually are. Right. So I wouldn't guess that this is, happens. Wouldn't be surprised if this happens a little bit more frequently. According to this article I read, and it does seem to be the case, that it was the difference in the autopsy. This autopsy showing that there was it was medical homicide that caused Elijah to die, as being the reason that this prosecutor pressed charges, whereas the initial autopsy didn't show that. There's 32 total charges. I think the most serious is negligent homicide. And while I am not opposed to charging any of these people, I do think that, it is just a little bit, going after the lower level people, and not the people who put this policy in place that I think predictably led to this kind of outcome. So I don't know if you have anything else, if you feel I missed any other important details. This is something we've been talking about for a couple of years, so sometimes I forget all the little things in here, Will. But maybe, just maybe, and I think from the first time we talked about this, we would be very surprised, somebody could be held accountable for this death.
Yeah. No, I think you covered all the updates on the news. One question that I would have, something I'd like to look into, is the decision to use ketamine specifically to sedate people in these situations. Because I know in a lot of times, like, they will use a benzodiazepine, a more like common substance. Like, ketamine is kind of a strange drug to use. It's like it's used in for animals, and animal anesthetic and stuff. So yeah, I'm curious, like, how these city health departments or police departments decide to use ketamine versus other drugs, which, like, benzos, I think, have less of an overdose risk. So, like, I'm very curious why they make these decisions.
Yeah, and I'm also curious, Will, why there hasn't been more media coverage about the police running around shooting people up with horse tranquilizer, because we all know.
Yeah, I will say that.
Yeah, that's the case. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the last thing. The Star Tribune in Minneapolis has done a great write-up on their local police killing people, and all the times that they've given people near fatal overdoses of ketamine during these kind of like mental health situations.
Right.
It's crazy.
And I on a past show, I talked about 2 other cases. I think one in South Carolina, one in Florida, where they gave somebody ketamine, and then Either they laid on the person and that killed them, or the ketamine itself killed them. But this is, again, a predictable outcome that's happened at least several times, and that's just been like something that almost nobody reports on, and usually the police don't, from what I could tell, don't even disclose like publicly if they did administer ketamine during arrest. Well, let's move on and talk about COVID, where we have quite a few interesting stories here. But I'll just start off with the one that you wrote this week. More data needed. Top health officials reportedly urge White House to follow science and delay vaccine booster plans. Will, what's going on here?
Yeah, that's right. So I believe the last time I was on, we talked about the White House's big announcement about booster shots for the COVID vaccines. Joe Biden had said that on September 20th, all American adults should start receiving third doses within 8 months of their second shot, or if it's the Johnson & Johnson of their first shot, that's only a single dose vaccine. And when we talked about this, I had mentioned that I thought it was kind of odd that he was announcing this so soon and putting a hard date, the September 20th date, on this, because the FDA at the time had not approved universal booster shots for any of the three vaccines currently used in the U.S., and they still haven't done so. They have approved booster shots specifically for Pfizer for people with compromised immune systems, and then Pfizer overall has gotten now like full authorization in general. But specifically for booster shots, they have not authorized those universally for any of the three vaccines, for Moderna, J&J, or Pfizer. And so I did think it was kind of bizarre that Biden just like rolled this out and put a hard date on it before they would even approve it. Because at the time when he announced this, they were still looking through some very like early preliminary data. And at the time, all the major health agencies did, back this decision. They said that, yeah, booster shots probably will be needed. However, since then, we now have some reports that the heads of the FDA and the CDC have now sort of started to reverse course. And they're urging the White House to now slow down on this whole booster shot campaign, saying that, like, man, we need some more time to actually go over the data to make sure these are actually safe and effective and actually necessary. And the New York Times, I know, had like 3 different sources that cited for this, and then it was later corroborated by Axios that the heads of both the CDC and the FDA are telling the administration to sort of chill out on this booster shot thing, not to rush it through. However, even though this is happening, even though they are urging not to rush this, the White House has already put this hard date on it for September 20th. So I'm not sure if this is going to make any difference. The agency heads urging caution on this because the White House has already made their announcement.
This is interesting, because I've talked to people who would not fall into the category that the FDA has suggested. People with compromised immune systems and everything, who are already talking about getting their booster shot because they believe that's what's recommended to do.
Right, because that's what the president literally told them to do in his announcement. But it's very interesting that the health agencies are kind of like they're saying the White House might be a little bit ahead of the science. They're always talking about following the science. Well, in this case, I guess the science is following the White House. But even if they were to delay at this point, I think booster shots pretty much are a foregone conclusion. They're talking about this stuff nonstop. And I highly doubt it'll stop with just this one additional dose, too. I've mentioned this on the show before, but the CEO of Pfizer, Albert Bourla, has talked about, he's floated this idea of yearly COVID vaccinations, like the way they do with the flu. And then Fauci, I know, Anthony Fauci, the top COVID advisor, he's reportedly been talking with Biden already about shortening the time period from 8 months to 5 months from when you should get your booster dose. And so, despite the health agencies urging the White House to slow down on this stuff, it doesn't seem like they are. It seems the stuff is going full speed ahead. And yes, we are headed toward definitely a single booster shot and likely, regular or multiple booster shots eventually.
Yeah. So, Will, there's just a couple other COVID stories I wanted to mention here. The first, I think, shows a very important insight into the two-tiered system possibility if you start allowing people to only access certain parts of society based on their vaccination status. And this is... A judge in a medical fraud trial dismissed the unvaccinated jury pool. This is Theranos, I think is is the name of the company. And this was kind of a popular story. If you go and look, there's a lot of information into this. But the founder of the company, Elizabeth Holmes, is on trial for fraud. Her company claimed that they had this special kind of blood testing machine that worked really, really well. Turns out that blood testing machine didn't even work, and they were like billing people for testing blood in those machines, and they were using different machines. And so, now her company rightfully is on trial for fraud. However, the judge in the case, I believe it's a federal district judge, Edward Davila, dismissed the entire non-vaccinated jury pool, all 9 members. And it seems to me that there may be a correlation between people who are skeptical about Big Pharma and people who have yet to take the vaccine. Just maybe that's a little bit of speculation on my part, but it seems like kind of a reasonable conclusion to jump to. And it seems like if I were on the prosecution, or the defense here, and I were defending the company, I'd be very happy that now the entire jury is made up of people who at least trust Big Pharma enough that, they've taken the coronavirus vaccine, and probably at least, currently right now have a positive outview of, that giant, that sector. And so I see this as being very problematic for justice in our country if we're going to start excluding anybody who has, not had vaccine from jury pools, especially if those jury pools are potentially impacted by the person's bias towards the medical industry and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then the other story I had on COVID was just this interesting one from Rolling Stone today, where the initial title of the story, says gunshot victims left waiting as horse dewormer overdoses overwhelm Oklahoma hospitals. That was the initial headline. However, the new headline says one hospital denies Oklahoma doctor's story of intermittent overdoses, calling ER delays for gunshot victims. And so, Will, you see that they've essentially had to retract their story, except they're calling it an update, even though now essentially they have no sources for their story. But this is just, one more example of a big red flag for me when it comes to all the COVID, information that we're getting, is that, they could be completely wrong like this. And Twitter doesn't put a flag on it. They don't have to retract the story. They don't even offer a correction. They just offer an update. And then they change the headline when calling it a horse dewormer already is pretty misleading. Again, me and you have enough integrity that we don't just frame everything when cops kill people with ketamine as calling it a horse tranquilizer, right? That would be kind of dishonest of what's happening, because the drug is tailored to humans. And so, it works for both species, and it is misleading to just say that that's what cops are killing people with. And yet that's part of what you have here. Second, Will, I don't know if you noticed the picture on the tweet, and for people who aren't watching, you have a bunch of people standing outside of who knows what. They're standing kind of close together. Nobody seems like they're in any urgency at all. Clearly, none of these people are gunshot victims. But the bigger thing is it's summer in Oklahoma right now, and all these people are in coats. This clearly can't be a current photo at all. And so, this is just another example of, the media being so misleading. And in fact, it reminds me of a recent tweet. I don't have it loaded up, unfortunately, but The Hill tweeted out, plane hits a building, and then tweeted out a picture of a 737-900, which is a big passenger line plane. Now, 4 people did die when a smaller, private plane hit the side of a warehouse, but, the plane didn't even, go into it. It was just, it looked like another 9/11 was happening from the tweet, and in reality it was just a plane tragically flying into the side of a warehouse. And so well, I don't know if you had anything else on COVID stuff, but those are just some propaganda pieces I want to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, I won't go too far into the weeds on this one. And you know what? I don't even want to say the name of the medication, just because the Skynet censors, but it, sounds like Shriver Mectin. This drug that everyone's calling a horse dewormer, that is such a frustrating trend. And you can tell it's obviously just like this NPC thing that's just being picked up through Twitter and social media. But like the drug, that is one of its uses to be sure. But like it's been used in human beings for decades for all kinds of different reasons. And you can go and find studies where, scientists are calling it a wonder drug for, its anti-parasitic qualities. And so I don't know. That just frustrates me so much. It seems like whenever there's possibly some kind of treatment for COVID, it was the same thing with hydroxychloroquine. That there's just has to be this effort to mock and demonize and denounce it immediately. And only the vaccines can be used as it's the only thing you can use against COVID. The things that just happen to enrich these big pharma firms to the tune of tens of billions of dollars.
Literally tens of billions of dollars. But I brought this up, and people really can't disagree with this. Well, had, let's say, a part of the COVID vaccine been initially developed for like cows, right, or mRNA,
Right.
like the first vaccines they developed were for like mad cow disease or something like that, right, and then it now works for
Right.
humans. Like, it doesn't mean it's exclusive. But if then all the anti-vax people were like, you're taking a cow vaccine, they would be censored, and that would be fat checked 24/7. And so it just goes to
That's right.
goes the bias and all of that. But let's move on. Will, I think we have the budget up next, where this is some
Yeah.
bad news for all of us taxpayers. Dave DeCamp has it at antiwar.com that the House panel approved a $24 billion boost to the military budget, and this came after the Senate already approved, I believe, a $25 billion boost to the budget. And so, while the two bills for the spending bill for the Pentagon this coming year are going to be different, and it'll come out at conference committee, likely that they pass a 24 and a $25 billion spending increase to it. We're going to see something like that when the final bill comes out. Now, there is a pretty good article at the Quincy Institute by Andrew Lutz on this to just explain what this actually means, because this is, while this is just an increase for this one particular year, this is a part of an effort by bipartisan war hawks, although mainly pushed, I think, by Jim Risch and Mike Rogers of Alabama, where they want a 5% increase to the defense budget every year. And Lutz goes through and calculates the numbers and finds that this is going to be a $1.2 trillion bill for us taxpayers over the next 10 years. Now, one of the amazing things about this, Will, is that it's not like there's a particular threat. If anything, there's a war wrapping up this week, so Congress should be lowering the defense budget, taking out at the very least the $3 billion slated to go to the non-existent Afghan National Army this coming year. So that would, I would hope, be the amendment change. But what this is about is spending more money on the military industrial complex, and we could see, Will, that this pays off very, very well for those people. There is a good article, again, by the Quincy Institute, this one by Eli Clifton, and it's titled "Top Defense Firms Spend $1 billion on lobbying during Afghan War, See $2 trillion return." And so he goes through and he looks at the amount spent on lobbying by the top 5 U.S. defense firms from 2001 to 2020, and he finds that they spent $1 billion plus lobbying Congress. The companies are Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman. In total, those companies saw their companies grow by 188% during the past 20 years. And more importantly, for every lobbying dollar they spent, Clifton finds that they made $1,813 in profits. And so, Will, I guess I have two kind of instincts. My first is to be absolutely outraged and scream at this at everybody I come across, and my second is we gotta figure out how to hire lobbyists, man, because it seems like that's about the best return on investment money could buy. And you certainly understand why the companies do it when they could literally spend $1 bribing a congressman and get $2,000 back from it. So, Will, what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, so the part about this plan to increase defense, or I am loath to call it defense, military spending by 5% every year. It's interesting when you go and read some of the statements from the lawmakers pushing it, like Rogers, and I think James Inhofe is another senator. You'll see they're citing a particular group called the NDS Commission, the National Defense Strategy Commission. And that's this 12-member panel of experts that's appointed by Congress to sort of like make recommendations for the national defense strategy, usually at the beginning of an administration. And the group specifically that they're citing that's pushing this 5% increase, it's made up of some pretty interesting people. The lead guy on it is Eric Edelman. That was George W. Bush's number 3 guy at the Pentagon. He replaced the horrible, evil neocon Douglas Feith, who resigned in disgrace under investigation. The former CIA director, Mike Morrell, is also on this panel. That was the guy who explicitly advocated for killing Russians in Syria when he was campaigning for Hillary Clinton in 2016. It's also made up of all these think tankers, all these ex-Obama and Bush and even Clinton officials from the Pentagon and from the State Department. So it's this group of people, these career foreign policy blob people, that's who's ultimately pushing this plan to, for this yearly 5% increase in defense spending.
And
so
I'm sure a lot of those
that,
people have ties to the companies who are profiting off of these wars. Something that we saw during the Afghan study group report that came out that recommended the U.S. remain in Afghanistan essentially indefinitely, that there were people on that commission that had undisclosed ties to military-industrial complex think tanks like the Institute for the Study of War. And so it's not like they're just bringing out 12 colonels who have been fighting in these wars, Will, and who have never worked for the military-industrial. All these people are bought and paid for, and their paychecks depend on them coming up with things that say we need to spend more money on our war budget.
That's right. And the last thing I'll say here about this amendment that Rogers is pushing, this that would add this $24 billion in spending, just to break it down a little bit, $250 million of that would go to the piece of crap F-35 program. $3.6 billion is earmarked for new Navy warships. Even though the shipyards are already very much overburdened and underperforming. $576 million directed toward the Navy to accelerate its production of Virginia-class submarines, which is having a lot of cost overruns and issues. $6.5 billion to be used on military construction projects in 14 states, so purely just boondoggle stuff. And then another $3 billion is going to be used for wish list requests from all the various combatant commands and military branches. So, it'd be one thing, as the author at that Statecraft article pointed out, it'd be one thing if this was like urgently needed spending stuff, but this is all just like honeypot, purely just, gravy train kind of spending.
Yeah. And for anybody, next time you're thinking about, can I afford to go out to dinner? Can I afford to take my family on vacation? Or, worst situation, can I afford to pay rent, bills, groceries, or something like that? Just remember that your congressman is sending your hard-earned tax dollars to Lockheed Martin to buy more F-35s that don't even work. And they know they won't even work.
Right. As well as perhaps Javelin missiles, which we might mention here. And I think, did you have anything more to say about the budget?
No. This is unbelievable, Will. More money to Ukraine. Can you believe it? By Joe Biden. So one of the few good decisions that Barack Obama made, Will, was not sending lethal aid to Ukraine. Trump, of course, undid that good decision. And Biden, more like Trump than Obama, once again, is going to provide Ukraine with an additional $60 million in military aid. And so these are going to include Javelin missiles, small arms, ammunition, and first aid kits. It's a part of, I think, over $125 million aid package to Ukraine. Some of it will include other things. I know the Biden administration has been intent on giving your tax dollars to every country in the world so they could fight their own climate change problems, apparently. although I doubt that money is going to those places in any of the countries. But anyways, here, Will, this is particularly provocative and problematic because this is an escalation in a conflict that really, in the wider scale, involves the U.S. and Russia. And, this is playing on the brink of nuclear warfare in a very dangerous situation. And while it would be smart for Biden to not offer the Ukrainians any aid and make it very explicitly clear to the Ukrainians that they will not be joining NATO and they do not have a security guarantee from the U.S., and so they'll have to figure out their own relationship with their neighbors, even if they feel like that's unfair. But rather, for whatever reason, well, the U.S. seems like it has to coddle Ukraine. We decided to give Ukraine aid in response to Germany building the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So Germany builds a better pipeline for them so they don't have to pay markups on fuel coming from Ukraine. And the U.S. decides that we have to take U.S. and German money and give it to the Ukrainians for that reason. And I have to imagine that part of the reason for this lethal aid, Will, is in an effort for Biden to appease the Ukrainians the same way. When, again, this isn't an American interest. None of us should care at all. We should just be concerned in this case with getting as much of our tax dollars away from that government as possible, and again, having them deal with their own situation with their neighbors. I wasn't sure if you had anything to add on this one. I didn't have a whole lot. It's absolutely outrageous that this happened, and it's worth noting that at the beginning of the Biden administration, he was saying very strong signals of support to the Ukrainian President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government. And in response to that, they were starting a military buildup and making threats like they were going to go and invade the areas that they believe are Ukraine that are in opposition to them. And so that, again, this would have provoked a conflict with Russia had they done it. And, I think Biden needs to be very, very careful about sending any of those signs to Ukraine.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, when you go and look, because Volodymyr Zelensky, I believe, just had his first actual in-person meeting at the White House with Biden. And they put out this joint statement. And in that statement, they specifically say that this aid package is to defend against, quote unquote, Russian aggression. They're still using that line. And in that joint statement, the White House is even bragging about how we've given Ukraine at least $2.5 billion in military aid just since 2014, since the coup d'etat that the Obama administration orchestrated there, and that we've already given them $400 million just this year. And who knows what the full amount is? Like, I'm sure there's other stuff they do that's not accounted for in the official tally. But now apparently we're slapping another $60 million on top of all this to fend off the evil Russians. But it's a completely ridiculous idea. Like, if Russia wants to invade Ukraine, there's no amount of Javelin missiles or non-lethal aid or whatever that we could give them to stop it from happening. It's kind of like the Taiwan thing. Like, if China wants to take Taiwan, there's not much we or anyone else can do to stop it. We could launch a full-scale nuclear war with them. We could exchange a few of our own cities, but they'll still take Taiwan in the end. And it's the same kind of thing with Russia. If Russia wants Ukraine, Russia can have Ukraine. So nobody seriously thinks that the U.S., this aid to Ukraine, can help them stand up to the Russians. It is a gigantic boondoggle for arms dealers like Lockheed Martin, who happens to produce the Javelin missiles that we have been selling to them all along. And this also, too, assumes that Russia even wants to take over Ukraine, which I think is completely ridiculous. Like, people may recall that those break-off republics in the Donbass, the Donetsk and Luhansk republics, tried to join the Russian Federation back in 2015 or 2014, and Putin said no way. He said, no, we don't want that headache. So the Russians clearly don't want to, control all of Ukraine. We could get into Crimea. That's a whole other story. But we've explained that issue on the show plenty in the past. That had nothing to do with wanting to control and invade Ukraine, but yet to stop it from becoming a NATO naval base. And so that's what I would say about Russian interests there. It's clear that they don't want to invade Ukraine. But they are interested in keeping it out of NATO.
Right. Well, the great show. Thanks for bringing all of your knowledge on, and let's wrap it up there. And people find the show video version YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, social media, Facebook, MeWe, Twitter. Twitter handle is at con_interest. He is at the Will Porter. I'm at Kyle Anzalone _. Donate to the show on Patreon, Subscribestar. Crypto information is in the show notes page, and it's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. Read antiwar.com. Will post all the articles that he writes as a staff writer at RT on his Twitter account and Facebook page. Will, thanks again.
Thanks, Cal. Thanks, everybody.